I walked into my father's birthday gathering expecting at least a fragile truce, but what I got instead was blood. The air smelled of roasted meat and red wine, the kind of celebration that should have meant family. But before I could even place my gift on the table, my sister Claudia snapped her fingers. Her German shepherd lunged forward like a missile, jaws locking on my leg with a crack that shot fire through my bones. The room froze not in horror, but in sick delight. My mother's lips curled into a thin smile, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. The dog shook me like a rag doll, teeth tearing through skin-hot blood soaking the hem of my dress. My scream split the music, but Claudia only laughed and pulled out her phone recording the carnage. When my father stood halfway from his chair uncertain, Claudia barked at him. "Sit down, Dad," she provoked it. "She is drunk again." The gaslighting came faster than the blood loss. My mother added in her cold voice, "You always bring trouble, Laura. Look at you, pathetic even on your own father's birthday." The betrayal hit harder than the dog's teeth. I had treated gunshot wounds in the ER, stitched bodies torn apart by accidents, but nothing prepared me for the pain of being shredded alive while my own family staged it as a joke. My vision blurred, the chandelier above turning into shards of light, but inside my chest, something burned hotter than fear. Claudia wanted me destroyed, humiliated, erased in front of everyone. Instead, I locked eyes with her bleed dripping onto the polished floor and whispered through clenched teeth, "You just wrote your own ending." In that instant, I knew this was no accident, no outburst, but a calculated execution. And I knew I would not let it stand. The smell of roasted lamb and red wine clung to the air when I stepped into my father's birthday gathering. But instead of warmth and celebration, the room froze as if waiting for my humiliation. Claudia stood by the fireplace in a crimson dress, lips stretched into that polished smile she wore when she was about to do something cruel. I had barely set the gift on the table before she snapped her fingers. Her German shepherd, a massive black and tan beast, trained on commands, launched across the rug with terrifying speed. Its jaws locked around my thigh teeth, puncturing deep, and the sound that escaped my mouth was a raw animal cry I did not recognize as my own. Pain seared up my leg hotter than fire, blood spurting in thick streams that soaked the hem of my navy dress until it clung heavy against my skin. Guests gasped, but not with horror. Some even chuckled nervously, their eyes darting to Claudia, who raised her phone and started recording. My mother's voice cut through the chaos like a knife cold, and rehearsed, she provoked it. "She is drunk again, just like always." My father stood halfway from his chair, torn between instinct and loyalty. But Claudia's voice lashed him down. "Sit down, Dad, this is her fault." The dog shook its head violently, tearing muscle from bone, and I felt my balance shatter as I collapsed to the polished wood floor. My cheek smacked against the cold surface, and I tasted copper and varnish, a grotesque mix of blood and polish. My mother stepped closer, not to help, but to sneer down at me, her perfume thick and choking. "You never should have come back, Laura. You ruin everything you touch." I had stitched open chests and cleaned shrapnel wounds in the emergency ward I had held dying strangers, while they gasped their last breath. But nothing prepared me for the agony of being mauled, while my own blood dismissed it as theater. My vision blurred, the chandelier above splitting into sharp fragments of light, and somewhere in the haze, I heard Claudia's laugh, high and triumphant, as she narrated to her phone, "Look at her, she cannot even defend herself. She is pathetic." A few guests turned away embarrassed, but none intervened. It was the perfect trap humiliation dressed as family celebration. My heart thundered as heat drained from my body, but something stronger than pain anchored me, a rage deep in the marrow that no dog could tear free. I clawed at the rug, trying to push myself upright, the shepherd's snarling teeth still buried, but I forced my eyes to lock on Claudia's. Blood dripped onto the floor in steady drops, each one a witness, and with a voice ragged but unbroken, I whispered, "You just wrote your own ending." For a flicker, I saw her smirk falter. She wanted me destroyed, erased, silenced, but she had shown her hand too openly. As darkness pressed at the edges of my vision, I understood this was not a slip of temper, but a calculated execution staged to make me look like the unhinged sister. And in that instant, I swore through the pounding of my heart that I would not let her win. I was not surprised that Claudia used a dog to tear at my flesh because she had been using sharper weapons since we were children. And they were not made of teeth, but of words and fists, sharpened by our mother's approval and polished by our father's silence. When I was 9 years old, Claudia shoved me down the back staircase of our old house after I touched a doll she claimed was hers. I remember the wooden banister catching my ribs as I fell, and the crack of my arm breaking against the final step. I remember screaming and holding the bent limb close to my chest, and Claudia standing at the top of the stairs smiling sweetly as our mother rushed over. I thought for once justice might come, but instead my mother hissed at me for being clumsy, said I should not have been running, and then stroked Claudia's hair, calling her responsible. At 17, Claudia took the family car without asking. I tried to stop her. She shoved me aside and the bumper clipped my knees, sending me sprawling on the driveway, skin torn raw. When I told my mother, she shook her head and said, "Stop exaggerating, you make your sister anxious with your drama." That was always the pattern. Claudia inflicted pain, I carried the wounds, and they turned the story into my fault. They called it discipline or imagination or clumsiness. But I knew even then it was gaslighting, though I did not have the word for it. Our father Richard sat in his armchair with the newspaper raised like a shield. He never looked at me long enough to acknowledge what was happening. Sometimes at night, I would hear him tell my mother that maybe she was too harsh, but by morning, he was back to silence, sipping coffee, staring through me as if I were the ghost haunting their perfect family narrative. Claudia grew into the golden child. Every birthday party for her was lavish, every achievement magnified, every mistake forgiven. I grew into the scapegoat, blamed for broken vases, missing money, even for our father's temper, when he came home drunk from his business dinners. Laura is the weak one, my mother would mutter. She never fits in, and the words etched into me like invisible scars. I started to believe them until I discovered in high school that I had a gift for staying calm in chaos, a steadiness that came when others panicked. I volunteered at the local hospital, and when a man stumbled in with a deep cut across his palm, I did not faint, I did not scream. I pressed cloth against it and told him to breathe. The nurses looked at me with surprise. One said, "You would make a good one of us." That was the first time I felt a kind of belonging not attached to Claudia's shadow. I threw myself into studies, applied to nursing school, and got accepted with a scholarship. The day I left for college, my mother told me, "Do not embarrass us. Claudia will be the one to carry this family name. You just try not to get into trouble." My father drove me to the station, but he never said good luck, only handed me a folded bill like a tip and kept his eyes on the steering wheel. I swore I would never crawl back. At nursing school, I found my rhythm. I worked double shifts, studied anatomy until my eyes blurred, held the hands of patients no one else wanted to touch. The first time I saved a life in the emergency ward, pressing hard into the chest of a man pulled from a car wreck, I felt a pulse return under my hands. That was mine, not theirs, not Claudia's, not my mother's. But even then, their voices haunted me. When I graduated, Claudia sent a message, not congratulations, but a picture of her new house with the caption, "Look who really made it." My mother called once in 5 years to tell me Claudia was engaged and made sure to remind me to keep my distance. My father sent nothing. Still, I kept trying, sending Christmas cards. They never answered, showing up once at Thanksgiving, only to be told there was no room at the table. Gaslighting became the family currency. They said I had chosen distance, that I was ungrateful, that my memories of bruises and broken bones were exaggerations. They painted me as unstable to neighbors, whispered that I had a temper, told relatives I had left because I could not handle responsibility. And so by the time I built my career in the ER, worked nights soaked in blood not my own, I carried two truths: that I could hold strangers together with skill and grace, and that my own family would rather see me broken than acknowledge me whole. When my grandfather died, the one man who ever looked at me with kindness, I learned through a neighbor that his will had been altered. The house he promised me listed under Claudia's name. I knew then the corruption ran deeper than bruises. But I did not fight, not yet. I told myself I had my own life, my own patience, my own worth, and maybe it was better to leave them with their lies. Still, the wound festered. I watched Claudia flaunt her perfect family on social media, her wealthy husband Brian standing behind her in every photo like a guard dog of his own. I saw my mother beside them, glowing with pride, my father stiff but present, and not one trace of me, erased as if I had never been born. The gaslighting had won. At least that is what I thought until the night of my father's birthday, when Claudia finally revealed the violence was not buried in childhood, but alive and hungry, and she unleashed it with teeth and commands. That was when I realized erasure was not enough for them. They wanted me destroyed, publicly bloodied until I could never stand again. And in the haze of pain, I understood my past was not memory, it was prophecy. What they had done in whispers and shadows, they now did under chandeliers, confident no one would ever believe me. Confident the narrative of the unstable sister would bury me deeper than any grave. But they had miscalculated. They did not know that years in trauma wards had taught me how to hold on, how to see patterns, how to wait for the moment to strike back. They had raised me on pain, but they had not broken me. The night Claudia sicked her dog on me was the night she made a mistake she could not erase. Because this time I was ready to fight back, not just with scars and memories, but with evidence, with allies, with the kind of truth even a courtroom could not ignore. I woke up to the antiseptic sting of hospital lights overhead, the faint beeping of monitors, and the ache of stitches pulling against swollen flesh. But the first thing I registered was the silence in the room. Not one family member by my bedside. My leg was bandaged thick from thigh to knee pain, radiating in throbs so heavy I could taste iron at the back of my throat yet. When the nurse checked my chart, she read aloud words that made the blood drain from my face, accident caused by patient tripping over dog leash. I rasped out, "No, that animal was ordered on me." But she glanced nervously at the door and muttered, "I only write what the doctor tells me." The doctor arrived an hour later, a family friend I recognized from Claudia's social circles, and when I demanded the record be corrected, he shook his head. "You were disoriented, Laura. Your memory is confused." I saw it then. The cover-up already unfolding, my pain rewritten as clumsiness, my terror reduced to instability. When I begged for photographs of the wounds, he refused, saying hospital policy prevented it, though I knew every trauma case had to be documented. I realized Claudia's reach extended here too. Alone, I reached for my phone on the nightstand and found the screen cracked and wet with my dried blood. Dozens of missed calls, none. Not one from my parents, not one from Claudia. Instead, a single text from an unknown number: "You should not fight this. You will only hurt yourself more." I stared at it until the letters blurred, and a cold chill spread through me. When I was released 2 days later against my protests, I limped out on crutches into the waiting area, where my father sat stiffly in his wool coat. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe he had come to take me home, but when I lowered myself into the chair beside him, he did not look at me. He only said, "Claudia told us you provoked it, you were drunk." My chest tightened with disbelief. "Dad, you saw it, you were there," but he raised his hand to silence me. "We cannot keep cleaning up your messes. Your sister has children, a reputation, a husband. You always make things about yourself." And with that, he stood and left me gasping in the stench of disinfectant and betrayal. I hobbled outside into the damp Virginia air, each breath scraping like glass, and swore through clenched teeth that if they insisted on erasing me, I would burn their false narrative with the truth. At home, I found an envelope shoved under my apartment door. No return address, only a single sheet inside a photocopy of a veterinary invoice paid in cash 2 weeks earlier for advanced aggression training German Shepherd targeted response. My hands shook as I read the signature at the bottom: Brian Whitmore. My brother-in-law. The pieces clicked with brutal clarity. The attack had not been spontaneous, it had been engineered. They were willing to weaponize an animal to destroy me physically and legally. I opened my laptop and searched public court records, my leg pulsing with pain as I typed, and what I discovered made bile rise in my throat. A new petition filed just days before the party. Claudia and Brian moving to have me declared mentally unstable and unfit to inherit any portion of family assets. Attached were affidavits signed by my own mother claiming I suffered delusions, that I had invented stories of abuse, that I posed a danger to myself. I scrolled further and saw my name smeared in legal ink, the unstable sister narrative hardened into official language. That was why they staged the attack. They wanted me discredited, injured, humiliated, then erased on paper. My phone buzzed again, another anonymous message: "Stop digging, or next time it will not be the dog." I slammed the device down, chest heaving. But beneath the terror, there was resolve building like steel. They had underestimated me. They thought the hospital cover up the false affidavits and my father's rejection would break me. But they had not counted on the years I spent gathering evidence in silence, the discipline forged in trauma wards, the instinct to document every detail. I pulled out an old box from under my bed files I had kept from the day my grandfather promised me the house notes he had written in his careful hand recordings I once thought meaningless. For the first time, I saw them not as relics, but as weapons. They had drawn first blood with teeth and lies. Now it was my turn to strike back with truth. I knew I could not fight this war alone, because I had spent a lifetime being outnumbered in that house, drowned by Claudia's voice and my mother's cold approval. But this time, I had something they could not anticipate: allies, who remembered me outside the family's lies. The first was Janet Miller, my old roommate from nursing school who had gone on to law, now a defense attorney with a reputation for shredding abusive spouses in court. I called her number with shaking hands, half expecting her to hang up after years of silence. But when she answered, her voice was warm. "Laura, it has been forever what happened. The moment I told her Claudia ordered her dog on me, she did not laugh. She did not question. She only said, 'Come to my office tomorrow. Bring everything.' When I hobbled in on crutches, she stared at the bandages covering my thigh and her jaw tightened. 'They did this to you.' I nodded, and she leaned across the desk. Her eyes hard. 'You realize this is attempted homicide, not just assault.' I felt a chill, even though the room was warm. Janet spread folders across the desk, subpoena templates, evidentiary checklists, things I had only seen in courtroom dramas, and said, 'We will need 3 things to dismantle them: motive, means, and proof. The motive is the inheritance, the means is the dog, and their influence over the hospital. The proof we will build piece by piece.' She asked me to recount everything from childhood to the present. And as I spoke, she scribbled notes, her face darkening when I described the staircase fall, the car bumper, the gaslighting. 'This is a classic pattern of coercive control,' she said. 'Long-term abuse disguised as discipline. We can use that history to show intent.' My chest felt lighter for the first time someone named it for what it was. The second ally came that evening when I stopped at the small corner store near my apartment and heard a voice behind me. 'Laura Bennett, is that you?' I turned and saw Tom Alvarez, our old neighbor, hair grayer now, his gait stiff from an old injury, but his eyes sharp. He told me he had seen Claudia training the German Shepherd in the yard at odd hours, commanding it to lunge at dummies dressed in clothes suspiciously like mine. He had been a cop once before retirement. He knew what that meant. 'I can testify,' he said, and more than that, I kept some records. He invited me to his modest home and from a dusty box pulled receipts from the veterinary clinic surveillance photos he had snapped when he grew suspicious, grainy, but clear enough to show Claudia with the trainer. My throat tightened with gratitude. They tried to erase me, but here was proof I was not crazy. Janet nearly whistled when she saw the photos. 'This is gold,' she said. 'Chain of evidence is intact because Tom has the originals. But we still need the smoking gun.' That night, as I sat in my apartment, leg throbbing, I realized it might come from inside their own arrogance. Claudia always bragged, always recorded, always needed an audience. I remembered seeing her phone pointed at me during the attack, capturing my blood as entertainment. If that video still existed, it could damn her. Janet told me, 'Do not try to get it yourself, too dangerous.' But the thought burned in me. Still, we moved forward carefully. Janet filed initial motions to preserve medical records, though we both knew the hospital had been compromised. She began drafting injunctions to freeze any property transfers, and she warned me they will hit back harder now. Tom, meanwhile, began canvassing neighbors, quietly asking if anyone else had seen strange deliveries at Claudia's house. And sure enough, One retired teacher whispered about late-night crates unloaded by Brian. Something deeper than family cruelty was festering. But for now, I focused on the immediate battle. My nights were long. My body ached. But sitting across from Janet and Tom, I felt something I had not felt since childhood safety in numbers. For the first time, the gaslighting cracked because their eyes told me I was not imagining, I was not unstable, I was not alone. The investigation began in fragments, each piece small enough to dismiss, but together forming a weapon sharp enough to cut through every lie my family had spun. Janet warned me that courts did not care about bruised feelings, but they cared about documents, timestamps, receipts, and photos. Tom understood that too, his years as a cop giving him instincts for what would hold up on the stand. He handed Janet the grainy photos of Claudia and the trainer, and she secured them in a folder marked exhibits. But she said what we need now is direct causation. Something that shows Claudia intended her dog to attack you, not just trained it for protection. That night, Tom came to my apartment carrying a small recorder. Said he had planted it near the trainer's shed weeks earlier, when the late-night sessions disturbed him. We listened together, the sound tinny, but clear enough, Claudia's sharp voice commanding Bite Leg now again harder, and the trainer praising the dog. My stomach twisted as I recognized my own name in her words. She said, "Laura will learn when teeth are the teacher." Janet leaned back, eyes wide. That is premeditation. But as soon as we had that victory, another threat arrived. Someone had keyed my car again this time, carving liar into the paint. My phone buzzed with another message, "Next time breaks." I felt my chest tighten, remembering the sudden lurch of my vehicle days earlier, the near miss on the highway, the mechanic shaking his head, saying the brake lines had been deliberately cut. They were not bluffing. I sat awake at night staring at shadows on the wall leg throbbing, and told myself fear was their weapon and evidence was mine. Janet encouraged me to document everything, every call, every scratch, every message. She filed a police report, though I could see in the officer's eyes that family connections still held sway. They wrote it down reluctantly, warning, without much conviction. Still, it was paper, and paper mattered. Tom, meanwhile, tracked down the vet technician listed on the aggression invoice. She was nervous, kept glancing over her shoulder, but finally admitted Claudia had demanded special training commands. Not standard obedience, but attack cues linked to specific phrases. She even remembered the way Claudia laughed, describing her sister as weak and ripe for discipline. We begged her for a statement. She hesitated, said she feared losing her job. But Janet promised whistleblower protection. Another crack in their fortress. Then came the most unexpected break. A cousin who had drifted away from the family years ago sent me a message on social media. "I heard what happened," he wrote. "You should know Claudia brags when she is drunk. I once heard her say she would make sure you never saw a dime of Grandpa's estate." He did not want to testify, but he shared screenshots of texts she had sent him gloating about training the dog to scare me straight. The words were cruel, dripping with contempt, but they were also time-stamped and undeniable. Janet filed them under corroboration. Slowly, the file grew thicker. But the most explosive discovery came when Tom and I drove past Claudia's house late one night. From the dark street, we saw the glow of laptop screens through her kitchen window. She was showing Brian a video on her phone, and even from a distance, I recognized the jerky movements of a recording. My recording. The one she had taken while the dog mauled me. My breath caught. If we could get that video, everything else would collapse. Janet warned that we could not trespass, but she filed a motion demanding preservation of all digital devices pending litigation. Predictably, Claudia's lawyer called it harassment. But 2 nights later, an envelope appeared under my door. Again, no return address, just a USB stick inside. I hesitated, heart hammering, but when I plugged it in, the file opened. There I was on screen, screaming blood, pouring Claudia's laughter loud behind the camera. It was sickening, but also salvation. She had kept her own confession, and somehow someone inside her circle had slipped it to me. I stared at the pixels until my hands stopped shaking, then forwarded it to Janet, who nearly shouted, "This is the smoking gun." We backed it up in 3 places, time-stamped it, notarized it, filed chain of custody. My family wanted to bury me under gaslighting, but now I had the photo from the guest, the audio from the trainer, the receipts from the vet, and their own damn video. Evidence layered like armor. Yet with every step forward, the danger grew. A black SUV lingered outside my apartment windows, tinted engine idling. Once I saw Brian behind the wheel, staring before driving off. Another time I returned home to find my door ajar, nothing stolen but papers shuffled, a warning that they could reach me any time. Fear pressed heavy, but Janet reminded me fear is what they use for decades. Evidence is what will end it. So I kept gathering. Tom pulled utility records showing unusual power spikes at Claudia's property, suggesting hidden refrigeration units, hinting at other illicit activity. Janet expanded the case to include fraud and property tampering. And I kept every scrap of paper my grandfather ever wrote, because in his looping script was the original will, leaving the house to me, the one document that proved they had falsified everything. When I placed that will on the table beside the blood-soaked photo and the USB, I felt for the first time that the narrative had shifted. I was no longer the unstable sister clawing for attention. I was the woman with receipts, recordings, witnesses, and scars. They had tried to destroy me with teeth and lies, but I had turned their cruelty into evidence that would tear them apart in court. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, the kind of air that clung to your throat and made every word heavier. And as I hobbled inside on my crutches with Janet by my side, I felt the weight of every scar I carried pressed against my ribs. Claudia sat already at the defendant's table, her tailored blazer crisp, her hair pulled into a perfect chignon, her eyes flashing smugness as if the outcome was predetermined. Beside her, Brian looked calm too. Calm, the kind of calm that reeked of arrogance. While my parents sat behind them like loyal witnesses, my mother stone-faced my father, refusing to meet my eyes. The judge called the room to order, and the first thing Claudia's lawyer tried was character assassination. He described me as unstable, prone to exaggerations, desperate for money, repeating the same script my family had fed for decades. But Janet rose her voice steel and said, "Let's let the evidence speak." She placed the first exhibit on the projector screen, the veterinary receipt, with Brian's signature for aggression training. The courtroom murmured. Then the audio recording crackled to life, Claudia's voice cold and sharp, commanding, "Bite leg Laura will learn when teeth are the teacher." Claudia's face blanched, but she tried to sneer, claiming it was taken out of context. Then Janet displayed the text messages Claudia had sent to our cousin, laughing about scaring me straight, and the murmurs grew louder. Still, the defense argued fabrication, that the receipts were doctored, that the audio could be manipulated. That was when Janet reached for the envelope we had guarded like sacred scripture. She slid the USB into the court system, and the video flickered to life on the big screen. There I was screaming on the lawn, the German shepherd tearing into my thigh, blood soaking my dress, and Claudia's unmistakable laughter shrieking behind the camera. The silence in the room shattered into gasps, one juror covering her mouth, the bailiff stiffening as if ready to move. Claudia's composure cracked, her face pale, her hands shaking. Brian leaned forward, whispering furiously to his attorney, but the judge raised his gavel for silence. Janet let the footage run until the laughter echoed through the speakers like a knife. Then she froze, the frame zooming in on Claudia's face reflected in the glass door behind me. Phone in hand, smile wide. "That is your client," Janet said firmly. "Not only witness, but orchestrator." The defense tried to object, but the judge overruled. And then Janet dropped the final hammer. My grandfather's original will notarized my name, clearly written as heir, complete with a video statement he had recorded years earlier. His voice saying, "This house goes to Laura. She is the one who never left in spirit." The combination was too much. The courtroom erupted, reporters scrambling for notes, whispers turning into a roar. The judge slammed the gavel, demanding order. But the chaos had already escaped. A uniformed officer entered briskly and handed the judge a note. His brows furrowed. Then he announced new evidence had triggered an immediate action. Federal investigators had reviewed financial transfers tied to Brian's shell company and found fraudulent contracts linked to defense supply lines. He ordered marshals to detain Brian immediately. In seconds, the room exploded with movement. Two officers stormed forward, seizing Brian by the arms as he shouted, "This is harassment. You don't know who you're dealing with." Claudia screamed his name, rising to her feet, but when she reached for him, the bailiff blocked her path. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls, while my father finally looked at me, his face twisted not with remorse, but with fear. The jurors stared wide-eyed, the gallery buzzed with energy like a hive breaking open, and I stood frozen on my crutches, tears stinging but refusing to fall. This was the twist they had never seen coming. Not the unstable sister, not the forgotten daughter, but the survivor armed with proof that tore their empire apart. The judge banged the gavel again, voice stern, "This courtroom will have order." But the damage to their image was already irreversible. Claudia's lawyer stammered, trying to salvage dignity. But Janet leaned in, calm and precise. "Your Honor, this is not just family drama. This is conspiracy, assault, and fraud. I want immediate protective custody for my client." "Granted," the judge replied without hesitation. My father muttered under his breath, "Disgrace." And my mother whispered, "Please, Laura, stop this. You'll ruin us." But I turned toward them and said loud enough for the microphones to catch, "You ruined yourselves." The press seized on it instantly. Pens scratching, cameras flashing as marshals led Brian away in cuffs, and Claudia collapsed back into her chair, trembling. The video, still frozen behind us, showed her reflection smiling as I bled. The irony was perfect. Her vanity had become her noose. When the gavel finally fell to adjourn for the day, the courtroom still buzzed with disbelief. But one truth rang clear in my chest. After decades of silence, my voice had become louder than their lies. The sentencing came 6 weeks later in a courtroom quieter than before, as if the building itself had absorbed the shock of betrayal and violence, and now waited for closure. Claudia stood pale, her once flawless image cracked beyond repair, her lawyer exhausted from battles already lost. Brian appeared gaunt, his arrogance thinned by weeks in custody. My parents sat behind them, faces hollow, my mother clutching tissues, my father staring at the floor. The judge's voice was measured but heavy. Claudia Bennett Whitmore, guilty of felony assault and conspiracy, sentenced to 7 years in state prison. Brian Whitmore, guilty of federal fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy, sentenced to 12 years with no parole. Restitution to victims ordered in full. My mother whimpered. My father sagged in his chair, but I sat tall on my crutches, legs still aching yet stronger each day. When the gavel fell the final time, I exhaled a breath I had carried since childhood. Outside, reporters clamored with questions, flashes lighting up the courthouse steps. One shouted, "Do you hate them now?" I paused, looked up at the sky where sunlight broke through gray clouds, and said, "I don't carry hate. I carry clarity." The words felt truer than anything I had ever spoken. That night, I returned to my apartment, placed the thick case file on the table, and closed it for the last time. Justice had not given me back the years lost to bruises and gaslighting, but it had given me something sharper: boundaries carved in stone. I did not answer my mother's calls. I did not return my father's letters. I let silence be the wall they had once built against me, now turned in reverse. Instead, I chose new company. Janet invited me to her home for dinner with her wife and children, laughter filling the rooms in ways I had never known. Tom checked on me weekly, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just sitting on the porch in companionable silence. At work, my colleagues welcomed me back, eyes widening at the scar on my leg, but respect shining through. Patients called me strong, resilient, the kind of nurse who knew what survival looked like and could guide them through their own storms. Slowly, the bitterness drained, replaced not with forgiveness, but with focus. I planted flowers on my balcony, their colors defiant against the city's gray. I started journaling, writing not just about pain, but about resilience, a record for myself and maybe one day for others who needed to hear it. In the end, they had taken everything they could: my childhood, my inheritance, my trust. But what they could not take was my voice, my truth, and the courage to stand alone in a courtroom and speak it. That was mine forever. And as I looked at the scarred line down my thigh, I touched it gently and whispered, not weakness, not shame, but proof. Proof that I had survived them. Proof that justice was possible even against family. Proof that healing did not mean forgetting, but building something stronger in the space where wounds once lived.